Last month, we talked about the kings of numbers 41 through 60, from Richard Petty to Jolie Johnson to Martin Truex Jr. and all the others in between. So following along with the series, today we'll talk about numbers 61 through 80. Numbers 61 through 69 feature some of NASCAR's least used numbers throughout history, and the names that wear the crowns over these particular numbers might be ones you've never even heard of. Such is the case for the king of the number 61, Sherman Utzman. Between 1956 and 1963, Utzman competed in just 21 races. 15 of these came with the number 61. In his time with the number, he scored 7 top 10s, but the highlight of his career as a whole came at the 1962 Confederate 200 at Boyd Speedway, where he got his one and only top 5. Other than that, not much is known about Utzman, and after the 1963 Turkey Day 200 at Tar Heel Speedway, he quietly left the sport, and his name seeped into the NASCAR history books, lost to time. The last time the number was used was way back in 2006 with Peak Fitness Racing, who was bought out by Front Row Motorsports after 9 races. The drivers who drove for them were Kevin LePage, rookie Chad Chaffin, Brian Simo, Chad Blount, Ted Christopher, Derek Cope, and Stanton Barrett. The number 62 has a bit more history attached to it, most of it coming from Curtis Kreider, nicknamed Crawfish. Born in Abbeville, South Carolina, he was one of the hardest working and underfinanced racers during NASCAR's pioneer era. Landing in a lake eventually earned him the nickname Crawfish. Like most early NASCAR racers, Kreider was a bootlegger and delivered moonshine to his customers. From 1959 to 1965, Kreider competed in 232 races. 136 of these came with the number 62. That's over 6 times more than the next closest driver to this mark. But it isn't his relative longevity that earns him a spot here. It's the 7 top 5s, 36 top 10s that place him comfortably atop every other driver to have piloted this number, such as Brendan Gaughan, who has the second most starts with the 62 at 21, coupled with 3 top 10s. He nearly soared above victory lane at the 2019 Fall Talladega race, before soaring above the field, ending his chances of capturing lightning in a bottle. The current driver for that Beard Motorsports entry is another Las Vegan in Noah Gragson, who raced his way into the Daytona 500 this year with the little team that could. Yet another name you may not be familiar with is Jimmy Hensley. Hensley's NASCAR career began in 1972, driving for famous car owner Jeannie Donlevy in the number 90 Ford. The 2 starts that he made that year came at Martinsville, the track being just 10 miles from Hensley's hometown of Ridgeway, Virginia. Though an engine failure in his first start relegated Hensley to a 33rd place finish, he completed all but 7 laps of the fall event to finish 5th. This would end up being Hensley's best finish in his 98 career Winston Cup Series races. Hensley competed again for Donlevy in the 1973 and 1974 Martinsville events, coming home in 7th and 6th place. For the 1974 Martinsville race, Hensley drove in the number 02 Chevrolet owned by Russell Large, finishing 19th. Beginning in 1975, he drove in the number 63 Chevrolet for part-time owner Billy Moyer, competing in both Martinsville races each year until 1977, and registering a top 10 each season. It would be his last Cup race for several years. The last time the number was used was with Dick Trickle back in 1996 for Schnell Racing. Trickle attempted the Daytona 500 and made the field, where he ultimately finished in dead last. He attempted the following race at Rockingham, but failed to qualify, and after this, the 63 has never been unloaded from a hauler since. One driver who used the number 64 throughout his entire career, and is often remembered for piloting it, is Elmo Langley. Langley began his racing career racing modified cars in Virginia and Maryland in 1952. He came into NASCAR as a driver-owner in 1954. In 1966, he partnered with Henry Woodfield and created Langley Woodfield Racing. That same year, he won the only 2 races of his long career. After the second race of the 1969 season, Langley and Woodfield split, and Langley continued to run the team on his own, returning to the driver-owner role. He finished 7th in points in 1968, 5th in 1969, 6th in 1970, 5th in 1971, 7th in 1972, 8th in 1975, and as he did in 1967, 9th in 1973. His final full season was as a driver for Langley Racing in 1975. He continued to drive in a few select races until 1981, when he hung up the helmet for good. Langley began to field his familiar number 64 for other drivers to develop their careers, including Tommy Gale, Joe Milliken, the aforementioned Jimmy Hensley, and Ken Schrader. Langley ultimately shut down his team after the 1987 season. While he left the sport, the 64 did not, and would be sporadically used up until 2010. Gunselman Motorsports, later called Max Q Motorsports, fielded the 64 on a limited schedule in 2010, with the likes of Tony Raines, Todd Bodine, Chad McCumbee, Landon Castle, Josh Wise, and Jeff Green. And now we get to the least used number in NASCAR history, the number 65, with a grand total of 94 starts, 21 of which went to Carl Adams. Adams began racing at Calhoun Speedway, located in the same town that would later produce one of NASCAR's all-time greats. The This happened in 1962, and it led him to eventually racing in both Superstocks and the open-wheel modified sportsman classes, and winning feature events in both before moving into CRA sprints. Additionally, Adams had considerable success racing super modifieds on a winter tour of ovals in South Africa. He won 3 CRA sprint car features before returning to the NASCAR Grand National West Division in 1972. He was named GNW Rookie of the Year for 1972. He competed on the GNW circuit in 1973 before heading off into the Premier Series in 1974 and 1975. It was in that 1975 season where he would make 19 starts in the 65, ultimately recording 4 top 10s. The last time the number was used? Well, you have to go all the way back to 1993 with Jerry O'Neill, who ran it under his team's banner. Next is the king of the number 66, Larry Frank. Born in West Virginia, Frank began racing motorcycles before moving up to sprint cars and midget cars. He then made 38 starts in the NASCAR Convertible Series in 1956. Frank eventually got his feet wet in the Cup Series, and after some years of putting together some respectable results, we get to the high point of his career, which occurred in 1962 when he qualified 10th for the Southern 500. He led 85 laps and lapped the entire field, finishing the race with 2 blown tires. But after a scoring issue, Junior Johnson was declared the winner. Frank filed a protest, and after a review, he was then declared the winner of the Southern 500. 4 years later, and he'd retire. The win, the 2 top 5s, and the 7 top 10s easily make him the king of the number. While he might be the only driver to have won with the 66 in real life, journeyman driver Timmy Hill won with the number, albeit virtually at Texas, in 2020 after booting William Byron out of the way. He piloted the number for 12 races last season and attempted the Daytona 500 this year, ultimately failing to qualify. Thus far, Boris Said is the most recent driver to have piloted this number, having raced at Dakota for the small motorsports business management team. While we talked about the best driver in talent, some good drivers in terms of likability, we can't ignore the best paint scheme with the number. The absolutely stunning Skull Bandit scheme, which Phil Parsons took to a top 5 coupled with 11 top 10s. The king of the 67 has got to be Buddy Arrington. He most notably has the second most starts without a win, having finished in the top 10 of NASCAR's points twice in 1978 and 1982. But it's his time before these years as an owner-driver that deserves some recognition. In his familiar number 67, he recorded 11 top 5s and 85 top 10s with the best points finish of 7th. The Martinsville, Virginia native was one of the toughest racers on the circuit, and even if he never brought home the big check and trophy, he always gave the field a run for it. The king of the number 68 is a driver whose career was relatively short, Bob Darrington. The Texan only made starts between 1964 and 1966, with 3 top 5s and 21 top 10s, as well as 1 lap led. He's rightfully the king of the number. However, Lenny Pond has got to be a close second, with 2 top 5s and 6 top 10s, as well as 68 laps led. As for the most recent driver to pilot this number, well, that would be Anthony Lazzaro, sports car driver / NASCAR road ringer, who attempted Sonoma in the 68 for TWC Motorsports, only to fail to qualify before attempting Watkins Glen, making the race and finishing 34th. The keys to the 69 go to Johnny Allen. He ran 173 races between 1955 and 1967, with 26 coming in the 69. However, those few races he ran in the 69 are heads over shoulders over everybody else who ran the number. He scored 4 top 5s, 13 top 10s, 3 laps led, and 1 pole. The most recent driver to have piloted this number was Denny Wilson in 1992 at Watkins Glen. The honor for the number 70 easily goes to J.D. McDuffie. After attending his first race at Bowman Gray by the age of 10, McDuffie was inspired to become a race car driver. He started off dirt racing and picked the number 70 because it was easy to paint and easy to remember. McDuffie won several small races throughout the Carolinas, including a track championship near Rockingham. McDuffie made his NASCAR Cup Series debut in 1963 at Myrtle Beach, driving Curtis Turner's old 1961 Ford. Though McDuffie was an expert dirt racer, he never had similar success in NASCAR's premiership. His best NASCAR finish came at the Albany-Saratoga Speedway in 1971, where he managed to finish 3rd. In fact, he holds the record for most starts without a win at 653. But in 624 starts in the number 70, he recorded 12 top 5s and 103 top 10s, as well as a pole at the 1978 Fall Dover race. While his longevity with the number 70 is unrivaled by every other driver to strap behind it, Johnny Sauter is a close second, having 1 top 5 and 2 top 10s in 2007. 2 years later, and Mike Skinner would wipe the rust off the number at Texas, finishing 43rd. Now we start to get to names that have a bit more synonymity with their respective number, such as the recognizable combination between Bobby Isaac and the number 71. The North Carolina farmer, who was a 6th grade dropout, began racing full-time in 1956. It took him a couple years to break into the Cup Series and find some success in it. He really found his footing when American businessman Nord Crosskop formed a team sponsored by his company K&K Insurance. This ultimately led him to winning 11 races and the championship in 1970, driving the famous number 71 Dodge Charger Daytona with crew chief Harry Hyde. Isaac and Hyde later took a car to Talladega in November and set a closed course speed record. When it was all said and done, he won 37 races in NASCAR's top series during his career and started from the pole position 49 times. Only 2 poles and 2 wins were with a number other than the number 71. A close second to him is Dave Marcus, who mainly owned and drove his number 71. The master of taking a shoestring budget and turning nothing into something, the man who wore wingtip shoes for decades, collected 5 wins with the number. Buddy Baker and Fireball Roberts are also worthy honorable mentions, collecting 3 wins and 1 win respectively. The last time the number was used was with the Racers Group, often referred to as TRG Motorsports, in 2011. Hermie Sadler made some starts for the team, and Mike Bliss closed out the 71's time in the sport at Homestead that year, but it was with Andy Lally where the car number would have one last hurrah. He only ran 32 races that year, but this was in a time where the development system in NASCAR was effectively stagnant, and if you were new to the Cup Series and ran enough races, you could effectively win Rookie of the Year by default, which he did. Not even Rhodey could save the team. Since they dropped out of the top 35 in owners' points, they were basically forced to shut down. Easily the most down-to-earth and humble personality in NASCAR history, Benny Parsons was everything and more. A one-of-a-kind talent whose racing philosophy was not as bold and brash as Cale Yarborough, not as fiery and fearsome as David Pearson, and certainly not as quick and racy as Richard Petty. He was methodical and relaxed in a time where you were hard-pressed to find anyone who was analytical. After winning the ARCA Championship in 1968 and 1969, Parsons moved to the Cup Series full-time in 1970. He had 23 top 10 finishes in 45 races, a pole at Langley Field Speedway, and finished 8th in the final point standings. While he was an owner driver at the start of the season, he also raced the number 72 car for LG DeWitt's team, DeWitt Racing. Parsons had 18 top 10 finishes in 35 starts in 1971, including his first win at South Boston Speedway. He finished 11th in the points. In 1972, he had 19 top 10s and finished 5th in the final point standings. And in 1973, all of the hard work that led up to this point was rewarded as he won the NASCAR Winston Cup Series championship with only 1 win. This was certainly an important element in Benny Parsons' success: consistency. He was as consistent and rock solid as it got in the sport. In fact, he finished between 3rd and 5th in the final point standings from 1974 to 1980 and won the 1975 Daytona 500. Most drivers come in with a bang and come out with a boom, but from beginning to end, Parsons was awfully consistent. He got out of the equipment whatever was in it. He got a few more wins into the 1980s, but after 1988, he'd hang up the fire suit and helmet in place of a suit and tie. His broadcasting career is just as fondly remembered as his racing career, but even more so, Benny Parsons, a human, is arguably more remembered by thousands of fans alike. The king of the number 73 is Johnny Beauchamp. You might know him for one very significant moment in the history of NASCAR, but in order to talk about that significant moment, we have to go back to 1959. A mechanic named Roy Burdick was asked by Holman Moody to buy a Thunderbird for $5,500 to enter in the first Daytona 500. This was likely an attempt to fill the field with as many Fords as possible to increase their chances of winning. Burdick agreed and asked Johnny Beauchamp to drive the car, an Iowa native who cut his teeth on Midwest short dirt tracks, winning several old model stock car features in his home state, and also a skilled IMCA racer, one of the biggest racing series in the Midwest at the time. Up until 1959, he'd run sporadically in the NASCAR Cup Series. He ran 3 races in a Hudson Hornet in 1953, and after an 8th at Davenport, he left the sport, only to return for a one-off at Daytona Beach in 1957, where he finished 2nd. And then he left again, which leads us to his return. And his return leads us to that 1959 Daytona 500. Beauchamp started 21st and had an absolute rocket ship, leading a few laps up until lap 149. After the dominant cars of Tom Pistone and Jack Smith dropped out of contention, the race had plopped into Beauchamp's lap. However, a certain man by the name of Lee Petty was going to give him a run for the trophy. They battled for 30 laps on end. Ultimately, they crossed the start-finish line in a photo finish. Beauchamp was initially declared the winner, but in an effort to get NASCAR on the front page of the newspaper, they delayed the official results for 3 whole days. By the end of it, they gave Lee Petty the win and scored Beauchamp in 2nd. After skipping the next 2 races, Beauchamp would get his first win at Lakewood Speedway, and then follow that up with the win in Nashville in 1960. Coupled with 5 top 5s and 7 top 10s in just 14 races in the number 73, he's definitely an underrated talent in NASCAR history. Travis Kvapil is the latest driver to pilot the number, having raced it in a 3rd entry for BK Racing at Darlington in 2012, where he finished 32nd. The king of the number 74 is LD Austin. Not much is known about the Greenville, North Carolina native. In 161 starts with the number, he scored 2 top 5s and 51 top 10s. And that's about all we know about him. Well, that was disappointing. How about the most recent driver to pilot the number? That would be Reed Sorensen in 2020. We all know Spire Motorsports runs that number 77 car and has run that since the beginning of 2019, except the one time they didn't. In an effort to promote the oh-so-awful Netflix sitcom The Crew, and in an effort to get some footage to use in the film, the team renumbered it to the number 74, and even got a fake sponsor, ironically called Fake Steak. This car ran twice at the Michigan doubleheader. I don't think the number 75 will have much debate over it. We probably all know who the best to pilot it is, Neil Bonnet. After leaving the Wood Brothers team, Neil Bonnet signed a one-year deal with Raymock Enterprises, owned by longtime engine builders Bob Rahilly and Butch Mock. Bonnet picked up wins in the Busch Clash and the Uno 125 at Daytona, as well as the Coke 600 at Charlotte and the Fall Atlanta race. He finished 6th in that year's points. Doing that for a small team such as Raymock is sure to draw some eyeballs, and one eyeball that was drawn to Bonnet was Junior Johnson's. Obviously, he wasn't going to refuse the deal, and the first year went pretty well, finishing 8th in the points. The second year was even better, finishing 4th. But after a disappointing 1986 season, which saw him finish outside the top 10 in the points, he was let go by the team and reunited with Raymock Enterprises in 1987, driving the iconic Valvoline Pontiac. Bonnet had 15 top 10s and was on his way to a top 10 points run when he broke his hip in a crash at the Fall Charlotte race, causing him to miss the final 3 races of the season and finish 12th in the points. He returned in 1988, finishing 4th in the Daytona 500, and won at Richmond the next week and Rockingham right after that. He also won an exhibition race at Calder Park in Australia, becoming the first NASCAR driver to win in the Cup Series outside the US. Temperatures that day were as high as 135 degrees Fahrenheit. But even still, Bonnet muscled his way to victory lane. As the season progressed, Bonnet began to have health issues, falling off the pace and missing several races. Due to Neil's health, sponsor Valvoline called for a new driver going into the 1989 season. Ultimately, Bonnet recorded 4 wins, 18 top 5s, and 39 top 10s, as well as 4 poles. The last driver to pilot the number was Brendan Gaughan in 2017 for Beard Motorsports. He scored 1 top 10. I mentioned Larry Frank's time in the 66 later on in his career, but he had some success with a different number early on, the number 76. On October 28th of 1956, Frank made his debut in the Cup Series in Martinsville, driving Lonnie Fish's number 76 Chevrolet, finishing 38th after losing oil pressure on lap 77. In 1957, Frank spent most of his time competing in the convertible series, racing in all but one race. Frank also made 4 starts in the NASCAR Grand National Division during the 1957 season, driving Fish's number 76 Chevrolet. His best finish of the season was 13th at Langhorne Speedway. In the 1958 NASCAR Grand National Division, Frank competed in 11 events. In total, he amassed 6 top 5s, 10 top 10s, and 72 laps led. The most recent driver to drive the number 76 was Ron Hornaday Jr., who drove his Spears Motorsports Chevrolet to a 34th place finish at Phoenix in 1994. The king of the number 77 is Jolie Johnson, no affiliation to Junior or Jimmy. He's another driver who I can really find much on. He did win the inaugural Coke 600, which is pretty substantial, as well as Nashville, but that's about it. In the 77, he recorded 4 top 5s and 8 top 10s in 19 starts. Currently, the number is run with Spire Motorsports. Justin Allgaier ran Bristol Dirt where he finished last. Landon Castle has made a handful of starts for the team, and then you have Josh Bilicki, who's the primary driver for the car. We've spent a lot of time dwelling in the photos and footage of old, so why don't we add some high definition and talk about the number 78's king, Martin Truex Jr. After riding around mid-pack with DEI and Chip Ganassi Racing, the 2-time Busch Series champion and one-win wonder went over to MWR. He really turned into a consistent driver, capable of showing genuine speed and winning. But after an infamous incident known as Spingate transpired and Napa left the team, Truex was left scrounging for whatever opportunity came his way. Help came in the form of Furniture Row Racing, a team run by Barney Visser and headquartered way out in Denver, Colorado. They started off with absolutely nothing, but somehow found a way to turn that into something special. Regan Smith elevated them from being a part-time team that barely made it into the top 35 in owners' points to a mid-pack team that could get an occasional top 10 or top 5, or a win, which he got at Darlington. Kurt Busch turned that mid-pack team into a consistent and reputable operation that had the potential to do great things in the future. With Truex, things got off slowly in 2014, but after they found their footing and formed an alliance with JGR, things only went up, and the sky was truly the limit. By the end of their time together at the end of 2018, Truex racked up 17 wins, 56 top 5s, 91 top 10s, and 12 poles. Truex went from being an afterthought in the NASCAR Cup Series garage to a reliable championship caliber veteran, and the transitory process between the former and the latter occurred in the 78 car. The king of the number 79 is Frank Warren. A flat track ace, Warren wheeled the number to 1 top 5 and 23 top 10s, as well as 73 laps led. He might have not done much in the grand scheme of things, but the amount of time he spent with the number earns him a spot here. The number was last used under the Go Green Racing banner in 2012, with a plethora of different drivers behind the wheel. Tim Andrews, Scott Speed, Kelly Byers, Mike Skinner, and Reed Sorensen all drove for the organization. The final driver we'll talk about in this video is Jim Pascal. In the number 80, he managed to get a win at Martinsville towards the end of 1953. He ran the number throughout the 1950s for George Hutchins. While he didn't run a whole lot with the 80, the few times he did still show a lot of the talent he boasted outside the number. 7 top 5s, 12 top 10s, and a pole rightfully situate him atop the 80. Eric Almirola is the most recent driver to have driven the number, having made his Cup debut in it at Las Vegas for Joe Gibbs Racing in 2007. While the 41st place finish wasn't indicative of things to come in his career, it was a start, a humble one for sure. So, there it is, the kings of numbers 61 through 80. I know a lot of these drivers aren't too significant in NASCAR history, but I still hope you all enjoyed. Anyways, let me know in the comments below whether you agree or disagree with this list. And until next time, this has been the news. I'll see you.